I don't want his house, Lauren said, lifting her chin toward the judge. I want half the company. The words landed so cleanly that for a second, no one moved. Not the court reporter. Not the attorneys. Not even the two members of my board sitting 3 rows behind me. I kept my eyes on Lauren while her lawyer placed a $38 million valuation on the evidence table like it was a restaurant bill we were expected to split. Half of Reed Industrial Automation, he explained. $19 million, or an equivalent ownership stake. A seat on the board. Voting rights. Access to financial records. The power to influence a company she had once called a bad idea with a logo. Lauren sat beside him in a cream-colored suit, calm and polished, wearing the expression of someone who believed the ending had already been written. We had been married 17 years. Long enough for her to know how I took my coffee, which shoulder bothered me when the weather turned cold, and exactly how much silence I could carry before people mistook it for weakness. My attorney, Michael Grant, leaned toward me and whispered, "Let him finish." I gave one small nod. Lauren's lawyer continued describing her sacrifices. The dinners she ate alone. The weekends I spent at the plant. The vacations postponed because a production line had failed in Ohio or a supplier had missed a shipment in Michigan. He made my work sound like something I had done to her instead of something I had done for us. According to him, Lauren had stood beside me while I built the company. That was an interesting choice of words. She had stood near it. She had benefited from it. But standing beside a fire and carrying the fuel are not the same thing. I said nothing. I watched the judge turn a page. I watched Lauren glance toward the board members behind me, already measuring the room as if it belonged to her. Then her attorney asked the question he had clearly saved for last. "Mr. Reed, do you deny that your wife is entitled to half the value created during your marriage?" Every face turned toward me. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning above the bench. I could smell old paper, floor polish, and the faint trace of machine oil that never completely left my hands, no matter how often I washed them. Michael placed his palm on the worn leather briefcase beneath our table. That briefcase was older than my company. The handle had been repaired twice. Lauren had laughed when I carried it into court that morning. She thought it made me look unprepared. She had no idea it held the only part of our history she had forgotten. I stood slowly and buttoned my jacket. "No," I said. Lauren's attorney blinked. The judge looked over her glasses. Even Michael let the silence breathe. "No, I don't deny that Lauren should receive everything she legally owns." A small smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. It was quick, but I saw it. She thought I had surrendered. Her lawyer straightened his papers and began talking about settlement mechanics, payment schedules, and the transfer of voting shares. The board members behind me shifted uneasily. 126 employees depended on Reed Industrial Automation. 126 families had mortgages, grocery bills, college tuition, and medical appointments tied to the decisions made inside our buildings. Lauren wasn't asking for a piece of furniture or an investment account. She was asking for the steering wheel of a machine she had never learned to operate. Still, I remained calm. That was the part she never understood. Calm was not the absence of a plan. Sometimes calm was the plan. The judge asked Michael whether we wished to respond before she considered the proposed division. Michael rose, adjusted his glasses, and lifted the briefcase onto the table. The old brass latches clicked open. Lauren's smile held for another second. Then Michael said, "Your Honor, before the court decides what Mrs. Reed owns today, it should review what she chose 11 years ago." The room changed. Not loudly. Nothing dramatic happened. But I saw Lauren's fingers stop moving against the edge of her legal pad. Her attorney turned toward her, confused. Michael reached into the case and removed a single sealed folder. 11 years earlier, when Reed Industrial Automation carried more debt than value, Lauren had insisted that my risk remain mine alone. She had wanted protection from the loans, the contracts, and the possibility that everything could collapse. She got exactly what she asked for, and she had signed her name to it on every page. Everyone in that courtroom believed the fight was over half my company. They were wrong. The real question was whether Lauren could escape the choice she had made when the company was worth nothing. 11 years before that folder reached the judge, Reed Industrial Automation was not worth $38 million. It was barely worth the rusted toolbox in the back of my truck. I was 33 then, working the night shift at a manufacturing plant on the south side of Indianapolis. My days smelled like hot steel, hydraulic fluid, and coffee that had been sitting on a burner for 6 hours. I maintained robotic welding arms along a production floor nearly a quarter-mile long. When one machine stopped, an entire line could freeze behind it, and every silent minute cost the company thousands of dollars. I was good at finding the problem. I could hear a failing bearing before the diagnostic system caught it. I could watch a robotic arm hesitate for half a second and know whether the fault came from its motor, controller, or programming. That kind of work teaches you patience. Machines do not care how frustrated you are. They respond to facts. At home, Lauren called it a dead-end job. Back then, we rented a 2-bedroom house near Beech Grove with thin walls and a furnace that rattled every winter. We had one reliable car, one unreliable car, and a kitchen table that leaned slightly to the left. I worked 10-hour shifts and accepted every overtime assignment I could get. Lauren worked in marketing for a regional insurance company. She wore clean suits, attended client lunches downtown, and believed stability was the closest thing life offered to safety. I understood that. Her father had lost his business when she was young, and she remembered collection notices arriving in the mail. She remembered her mother counting cash at the grocery store. To Lauren, risk was not exciting. It was a door that could close without warning. The idea for my company began with a machine everyone else had given up on. One of our welding cells kept shutting down because its control system overheated. The manufacturer recommended replacing an entire module for more than $60,000. I studied the failure logs during lunch breaks, then built a modified cooling assembly from parts that cost less than $800. The repair worked. The line ran for 6 months without another shutdown. My supervisor accepted the praise. I received a gift card and a note from Human Resources. That evening, I sat at our crooked kitchen table and told Lauren I wanted to start servicing industrial equipment on weekends. She looked at me for a long moment before asking how much it would cost. I said $5,000 for tools, insurance, and a used service trailer. She asked how much I expected to earn. I told her I did not know. That answer changed the temperature in the room. Lauren folded her hands and said we were finally getting ahead. She reminded me that we wanted a better house and that someday we might have children. She asked why a man with a steady paycheck would gamble on factory owners who might never call. I told her it was not a gamble if I knew how to solve problems they could not solve themselves. She did not argue after that. She simply said, "Keep it separate from our life." I took the money from my personal savings and rented a 900-square-foot garage behind an auto body shop. The roof leaked near the back wall. The heater worked only when it wanted to. My first desk was a door laid across 2 metal cabinets. I painted the words "Reed Industrial Automation" on a plywood sign and hung it above the entrance with screws that were too long. For 3 months, the telephone barely rang. I worked nights at the plant, slept 4 hours, then drove across central Indiana handing out business cards to factories. I visited machine shops in Anderson, packaging plants in Plainfield, and warehouses nearly 50 miles away. Most managers gave me the same polite smile people reserve for someone they expect never to see again. Then a food processing facility called at 2 in the morning. Their conveyor system had stopped, and their regular contractor could not arrive until Monday. I drove 38 miles through freezing rain with my tools sliding across the floor of the truck. The problem was a damaged sensor cable buried beneath a steel guide rail. I repaired it in 90 minutes. Before I left, the plant manager asked whether I could inspect the rest of their line. That one emergency call became a service contract. The service contract became 3 more. Within a year, I hired my first technician, then my second. I left the night shift with no ceremony, carrying my lunchbox and a cardboard box filled with manuals. Lauren watched me place them in the garage and asked whether I was sure. I told her no. I told her certainty was something people claimed after the hard part was over. At that moment, Reed Industrial Automation had 6 clients, 2 employees, and less than $12,000 in the bank. It was not an empire. It was a promise held together by invoices, borrowed equipment, and my belief that careful work would eventually speak louder than fear. For the next 4 years, the company grew one careful contract at a time. We moved out of the leaking garage and into a 12,000-square-foot building near Interstate 465. I hired engineers, electricians, and field technicians who knew how to solve problems without making excuses. We repaired aging equipment, redesigned control panels, and helped factories avoid shutdowns that could cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. I learned how to read balance sheets after midnight, negotiate with suppliers before sunrise, and make payroll even when customers were late. Lauren saw the new trucks in the parking lot and the company name printed on clean uniforms, but she never trusted the growth. Every good month looked temporary to her. Every new hire looked like another obligation waiting to become a problem. Then we received the contract that was supposed to change everything. A national appliance manufacturer wanted us to design and install an automated assembly system at a new facility outside Fort Wayne. The contract was worth more than $4 million, almost twice our annual revenue at the time. I remember carrying the signed pages into the kitchen and placing them in front of Lauren. She read the first page, looked at the total, and asked how much money we had to spend before we were paid. That was the right question. We needed equipment, software, subcontractors, insurance, and enough payroll to support a larger crew for nearly a year. The bank approved a line of credit based on the contract. I personally guaranteed part of it because the company did not yet own enough assets to satisfy the lender. Lauren stared at the signature line on the loan documents and asked whether our house was at risk. I told her the structure was more complicated than that. But yes, if the project failed badly enough, our personal finances could be affected. Her face went still. She said, "You promised to keep this separate from our life." I reminded her that the contract could move us into a different future. She replied that a different future was not always a better one. I signed anyway. For 8 months, the project ran exactly as planned. Our crews worked 6 days a week. The new system took shape across a production floor longer than 3 football fields. Conveyor sections arrived from Ohio. Robotic cells came from Wisconsin. Custom control cabinets filled our shop in Indianapolis. By the time we completed the first major installation phase, Reed Industrial Automation had spent nearly $2 million. Then the client stopped paying. At first, their accounting department blamed a software transition. Then they blamed an internal audit. 2 weeks became 6. 6 became 10. I called every executive whose number I had. Most did not answer. The one who finally returned my call spoke carefully and told me the company was restructuring its debt. 3 days later, it filed for bankruptcy protection. The unpaid invoices totaled more than $1,600,000. We still owed suppliers, subcontractors, and the bank. The contract that was supposed to lift us had become an anchor tied to every account we owned. I did not tell Lauren immediately. I spent 2 nights in my office studying cash flow reports and trying to find a path that did not exist. When I finally came home, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. She had already heard from the bank because one of the loan officers had called our house. She asked me how much we owed. I said the total exposure could reach $1,800,000. She repeated the number slowly, as if saying it more carefully might make it smaller. Then she asked whether I could close the company and walk away. I told her closing would not erase the guarantees, and it would leave 23 employees without jobs. Lauren pushed the legal pad toward me. On it, she had written 3 words in capital letters. Separate everything now. She wanted her name removed from any account connected to the business. She wanted written confirmation that she would never be responsible for the company debt. She wanted the house, her retirement savings, and every asset in her name protected. I told her that protection had a cost. She said she did not care. "Your company is your risk, Nathan. I want no part of it." The next morning, she contacted an attorney named Elaine Porter. Michael Grant represented me, although at that time he was still a younger lawyer working from a narrow office above a pharmacy downtown. The 2 attorneys drafted an agreement that took nearly 3 weeks to complete. Its purpose was simple. I would accept full responsibility for the company obligations and release Lauren from any claim connected to its debts. In return, she would waive every present and future ownership interest in Reed Industrial Automation, including any increase in value that might occur later. Elaine explained each provision to her. Lauren requested 2 changes, both of which gave her additional protection. She reviewed the final document for 5 days. Then we met in a conference room with gray carpet, a humming ceiling vent, and a notary seated at the far end of the table. Lauren signed the first page, then initialed every section that referred to ownership, future appreciation, and marital claims. Her hand never shook. When Michael asked whether she understood that the company might recover and become valuable, she gave a tired smile. "That company will be gone within a year anyway." The notary stamped the final page. The sound was quiet, almost ordinary. At the time, it felt like Lauren was closing a door between herself and my failure. Neither of us understood that she had also closed the same door on my success. The agreement protected Lauren, but it did nothing to protect the 23 people waiting for me at the shop the next morning. They stood beside unfinished control cabinets and crates of equipment that no longer had a paying customer. Some of them already knew about the bankruptcy. Others only knew that the bank had called twice before 8 o'clock. I looked at their faces and understood that fear has its own kind of silence. No one asked whether the company would survive. They were waiting to hear whether they should start looking for new jobs. I told them the truth. We had enough cash for one more payroll, maybe two if every customer paid on time. We owed suppliers more than $900,000. The bank could reduce our credit line at any moment. I could not promise that the doors would remain open. What I could promise was that no one would learn they had lost a job through a locked entrance or an unanswered telephone. I would face them myself. 3 employees resigned that week. I did not blame them. People had children, car payments, and refrigerators that did not fill themselves. The others stayed, although I could see them studying me each morning for signs that the end had arrived. I sold my truck and bought an old service van with more than 200,000 miles on it. I canceled the lease on our storage unit and moved everything we could fit into the main building. I stopped taking a salary. At night, I slept on a narrow couch in my office because driving home felt like wasting gasoline and time. Lauren remained in the house, protected from every loan and every collection notice exactly as the agreement required. We still spoke, but our conversations had become careful and practical. She asked when I would admit the company was finished. I told her I would admit it when the numbers proved it. Until then, I kept working. I called every factory within 200 miles. I offered emergency service contracts, maintenance inspections, and repairs that larger firms considered too small to accept. During the day, I negotiated with creditors. At night, I traveled with the field crews. We repaired packaging lines in Kentucky, conveyor systems near Dayton, and an aging paint booth outside Chicago. Every invoice became another week of electricity. Every payment became another set of paychecks. The company was no longer growing. It was breathing one shallow breath at a time. Rosa Martinez had been our office manager since the garage days. She knew which customers paid late, which suppliers would extend terms, and which employees were too proud to admit they needed help. One Friday afternoon, she entered my office carrying a cashier's check for $25,000. I asked where it came from. She said she had borrowed against her pickup truck. I pushed the check back across the desk. Rosa folded her arms and told me the money was not charity. It was a loan to keep the health insurance active for the crew. Her husband needed regular treatment for a heart condition, and 2 other families had children with ongoing medical needs. She said, "You kept us working when it would have been easier to close. Let us help keep the doors open." I told her I could not risk her truck. She replied that the truck was replaceable, but trust was not. I accepted the check under one condition. Her loan would be documented, secured, and repaid before I ever received another dollar from the company. Michael prepared the paperwork that evening. That check bought us 12 days. 12 days later, a plastics manufacturer in Lafayette called about a production line that had been failing for months. Their current contractor wanted to replace the entire system for nearly $3 million. I studied the diagrams and found that the problem came from outdated control software and inconsistent sensor timing. We proposed an upgrade for less than 1/3 of the replacement cost. They gave us 72 hours to prove it could work. My engineers and I stayed inside that plant through 3 nights, drinking vending machine coffee and testing each change until the line ran without interruption. On the 4th morning, the plant manager signed a service agreement worth $800,000. It did not erase our debt, but it changed the direction of the current. That contract led to another plant owned by the same corporation, then another. Within 18 months, we had repaid Rosa, caught up with our suppliers, and reduced the bank debt by more than half. The year Lauren said would bury the company became the year that taught us how to survive. I learned that a business is not saved by one brilliant decision. It is saved by people who keep showing up when leaving would make more sense. Long before Reed Industrial Automation was worth millions, it had already become something money could not measure. It was the promise we had made to one another in the year no one expected us to live through. Success did not arrive with a trumpet. It came quietly, disguised as full payroll accounts, paid invoices, and mornings when the telephone rang before I reached my desk. Reed Industrial Automation moved into a larger facility north of Indianapolis, then added a second building for engineering and fabrication. We hired veterans, apprentices, programmers, and technicians who understood that careful work still mattered. The company grew from 20 employees to 40, then 70, then more than 100. We began designing complete automation systems instead of repairing the ones other firms had installed. Our name appeared on projects in Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, and Kentucky. By the time I was 44, Reed Industrial Automation employed 126 people and had been valued at $38 million. The numbers looked impressive on paper, but I still arrived before sunrise. I still walked the production floor with coffee in a plain metal mug. I still knew which machines made a different sound when the temperature dropped. Growth did not make the work easier. It only made the consequences larger. Lauren changed more slowly than the company did, which made it harder to notice at first. During the worst years, she had treated the business like a contagious illness. She never asked about our customers, our employees, or the nights I slept at the shop. Once the debt disappeared and the profits became predictable, her questions changed. She wanted to know when we would buy a larger house. She asked why we did not belong to a private club. She suggested that our old friends no longer fit the life we had built. At charity dinners, she introduced herself as the woman who had helped build Reed Industrial Automation from the ground up. The first time I heard her say it, I thought I had misunderstood. She was speaking to a group of executives beneath the chandeliers of a downtown hotel. One hand rested around a glass of sparkling water while the other touched my arm. Nathan had the technical mind, she said, smiling. But I was the one who kept the vision alive. The people around us nodded as if they had just learned the final piece of an inspiring story. I looked at Lauren and waited for her to glance at me, to show some private sign that she knew it was an exaggeration. She did not. On the drive home, I asked what she meant. She said I was being sensitive. She reminded me that marriage was a partnership. I told her partnership was a strange word for someone who had legally separated herself from every risk. The air inside the car went cold. Lauren stared through the windshield and said, "That was years ago. People change." I let the silence sit between us. People do change. Documents do not. After that, she began attending more company events. She asked Owen Parker, our chief financial officer, for revenue reports that had nothing to do with household planning. She invited 2 board members to dinner without mentioning it to me until the table was already set. She spoke confidently about expansion, acquisitions, and future dividends, using phrases she had picked up from conversations she had never been part of before. At first, I tried to believe she was finally interested in the work. That would have been easier. Then I noticed she never asked how the employees were doing. She asked what the company would be worth if we sold it. She never asked whether our new facility was running efficiently. She asked how much equity I controlled. She did not want to understand the machine. She wanted to know where the keys were kept. One evening, I returned home and found a printed business valuation on the kitchen counter. It had been prepared by a firm in Chicago. The cover page listed Reed Industrial Automation, estimated market value, and confidential review. Lauren walked in while I was reading it. She stopped for half a second, then crossed the room and picked up the document. She said it was for estate planning. I asked which estate planner had requested it. She gave me a name I did not recognize. I asked why I had not been included. She said she wanted to understand our financial future without turning every conversation into a business meeting. Her answer was smooth. Too smooth. I had spent my life diagnosing systems by watching small delays between command and response. Lauren's delay had lasted less than a second, but it told me something was wrong. I did not accuse her. I did not raise my voice. I simply began paying attention. Over the next 3 months, she asked whether our operating agreement allowed a spouse to inherit voting shares. She wanted to know whether board approval was required for a sale. She asked what would happen if an owner was forced to transfer equity during a divorce. Each question arrived casually, usually over dinner, surrounded by comments about weather, travel, or neighborhood news. She thought the ordinary conversation would hide the pattern. It did not. By then, the woman who once wanted no part of my company had begun speaking about it, as if she were waiting for someone to hand her half. The past was inconvenient, so she rewrote it. She had not abandoned the risk. She had supported me from a safe distance. She had not signed away ownership. She had protected our family. She had not expected the company to fail. She had always believed in me. Lauren repeated the new version so often that I sometimes wondered whether she believed it herself. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, Owen forwarded me an email that was never meant to reach my inbox. The message contained 3 attachments: a private valuation, a proposed divorce timeline, and a plan for what Lauren intended to do once she controlled enough of the company to force a sale. The email had been sent by Lauren to a valuation consultant named Daniel Mercer, then forwarded to Owen by mistake when the consultant replied to an old company thread. Owen called me less than a minute later. His voice was careful, the way people speak when they know a sentence is about to change someone else's life. He apologized 3 times before I told him to stop. The mistake was not his. I opened the first attachment and saw a detailed estimate of Reed Industrial Automation's value, broken down by equipment, contracts, cash reserves, intellectual property, and projected earnings. The second attachment contained a proposed divorce strategy prepared by Charles Whitmore, an attorney whose name I had never heard Lauren mention. The third was worse. It described what she intended to do if the court awarded her a large ownership interest. She would demand a seat on the board, block future expansion, and pressure the company into buying her shares at a premium. If the board refused, she planned to support a sale to one of our largest competitors. One sentence sat in the middle of the page with the confidence of someone discussing furniture placement. Once the court gives me half, Nathan will not be able to stop the sale. I read it twice. Then a third time. The office around me remained ordinary. The ventilation system hummed. A forklift beeped in the warehouse. Someone laughed near the break room. 126 people were working inside a future Lauren had reduced to a bargaining position. For several minutes, I felt nothing. That frightened me more than anger would have. Anger is loud. It tells you where it is. This was quieter. It moved through me like cold air under a closed door. Owen asked whether he should notify the board. I told him no. He asked whether he should contact our corporate attorney. I told him to preserve the email exactly as it had arrived and make no further copies until Michael gave instructions. Then I closed my office door and called the man who had represented me when the company was almost buried under debt. Michael answered on the second ring. I said, Lauren is preparing to file for divorce, and she believes she owns half the company. He did not ask how I felt. That was one reason I trusted him. He asked what evidence I had. I forwarded the message while we were still on the telephone. He read in silence, then said, do not confront her. Do not change accounts. Do not send anything you would not want a judge to read. Facts first, feelings later. That evening, I drove home at my usual time. Lauren was in the kitchen preparing salmon and roasted vegetables. She asked how my day had been. I said it had been busy. She told me about a luncheon downtown and complained that the restaurant had seated her near the kitchen. I listened, poured water into a glass, and watched the woman I had known for 17 years move through our home as if nothing had changed. Her telephone rested face down beside the cutting board. The printed valuation was gone. During dinner, she asked whether the company had ever considered selling to a larger firm. I cut a piece of salmon and said several buyers had approached us over the years. She asked what would happen to my shares if I died or became unable to manage the business. I answered carefully. Her questions no longer sounded casual. They sounded rehearsed. When she reached across the table and touched my hand, I almost asked her why. Why now? Why this way? Why had the company become more valuable to her than the marriage that surrounded it? Instead, I said I was tired and went upstairs. Silence was not surrender. It was storage. I was putting every word somewhere safe. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael assembled a small team. They reviewed the operating agreement, tax filings, board minutes, loan guarantees, and every document created during the year of the bankruptcy. We met before sunrise in his office, so Lauren would not notice changes in my schedule. I brought banker boxes from the company archive, some filled with papers I had not touched in more than a decade. Dust coated the lids. Old shipping labels had faded nearly white. Michael read everything. He did not skim. He treated each page like a machine component that might appear insignificant until the entire system stopped without it. On the 4th morning, he found a reference in an old loan file to a spousal waiver and separate property agreement. We searched the company records, but the signed original was missing. Michael remembered that his former firm had stored closed files at an off-site records facility outside Carmel. The retrieval request would take several days. Until then, we had only a reference number and my memory of a gray conference room, a humming ceiling vent, and Lauren signing every page. At home, she became unusually kind. She suggested a weekend trip. She asked whether I was sleeping well. She spoke about our future using words that sounded borrowed. I answered without accusation because accusations create defenses, and defenses destroy evidence. 3 days later, Michael called while I was walking the production floor. He said the storage company had located the box. The original agreement was inside, complete with signatures, initials, attorney certifications, and the notary seal. I stopped beside a row of control cabinets and rested my hand against the cool steel. Paper does not feel like armor until someone comes for what you built. Lauren believed she was planning the end of our marriage. She did not know that 11 years earlier, she had already planned the end of her claim. Lauren filed for divorce 9 days after Michael recovered the original agreement. She chose a Monday morning, perhaps because she believed bad news sounded more professional at the beginning of a workweek. A process server met me in the lobby of our engineering building while employees crossed behind him carrying coffee and project folders. He handed me a white envelope and asked me to confirm my name. I signed, thanked him, and returned to my office. No one on the production floor knew that my marriage had just been reduced to numbered paragraphs. Lauren requested the house, several investment accounts, continuing financial support, and 1/2 of Reed Industrial Automation. Her filing described the company as marital property created through our joint effort. It did not mention the debt agreement. It did not mention her attorney. It did not mention the signature she had placed on every page 11. Years earlier, Michael read the petition without changing expression. Then he closed the folder and said, "We do not show them everything yet." I understood. In manufacturing, you do not shut down an entire line because one sensor gives a questionable reading. You verify the fault. You trace the signal. You let the system reveal where it is broken. The legal process moved slowly. Financial statements were exchanged. Account records were reviewed. Charles Whitmore sent long requests for company documents, board minutes, contracts, insurance policies, and payroll reports. Lauren's team wanted to portray the business as a shared marital achievement while treating every loan, sacrifice, and sleepless year as background noise. We complied with every proper request. We did not hide revenue. We did not move money. We did not change ownership. Michael said clean hands were more valuable than clever tricks. The deposition took place in a conference room on the 22nd floor of an office tower in downtown Indianapolis. Rain streaked the windows, turning the city below into a gray pattern of headlights and rooftops. Lauren sat across from me beside Charles. She wore a navy suit and a small gold watch I had given her on our 10th anniversary. A court reporter arranged her equipment at the end of the table. Michael placed a yellow legal pad in front of him and left it blank. Charles began with harmless questions. My name, my age, my role at the company, the date of our marriage. Then he moved toward ownership. He asked when Reed Industrial Automation had been formed. He asked whether the company had increased in value during the marriage. He asked whether Lauren had attended business events, hosted clients, or supported me while I worked long hours. I answered precisely. Yes, the company had grown. Yes, Lauren had attended events. Yes, there had been nights when I returned home late. Facts did not frighten me. Facts were the only stable floor left in the room. After nearly 2 hours, Charles leaned back and asked whether I possessed any document proving that Lauren had permanently surrendered her right to claim an interest in the company. Michael looked at me once. It was not a warning. It was a reminder to answer only the question asked. There is a record of every choice we made, I said. Charles smiled as if I had avoided the subject. That was not my question, Mr. Reed. Do you have a valid agreement signed by my client that excludes the entire company from the marital estate? Michael spoke before I could answer. We will produce all responsive documents according to the court's schedule. Charles tapped his pen and turned to Lauren. Her deposition began after lunch. I remained in the room because Michael wanted me to hear every word. Charles guided her through the story they had prepared. Lauren said she had encouraged me to start the business. She said she had accepted years of uncertainty because she believed in my talent. She said our marriage had functioned as a partnership and that every major financial decision had been made together. Then Michael began his questions. His voice was polite and almost quiet. He asked whether Lauren remembered the appliance project that had failed. She said vaguely. He asked whether she remembered the company debt. She said she recalled being worried but did not remember the amount. He asked whether she had ever hired an attorney to protect her personal assets from business obligations. Lauren looked at Charles before answering. Not that I remember. Michael waited. The court reporter's keys clicked softly. He asked whether she had ever signed a document giving up any ownership rights in Reed Industrial Automation. No, Lauren said. I would never have agreed to that. Michael asked whether any lawyer had ever explained such a waiver to her. No, he asked whether she had initialed pages dealing with future appreciation, company equity, or separate property. Her voice became firmer. Absolutely not. Charles shifted in his chair, but he did not interrupt. Lauren continued, saying that if any document existed, it must have been presented without proper explanation or included among routine papers she had not understood. Michael finally wrote something on his legal pad. One sentence. I could not read it from where I sat. He asked his final question. Your testimony is that you never knowingly signed away any present or future claim to Reed Industrial Automation. Lauren looked directly at me before she answered. That is correct. Michael closed his notebook. No further questions. Outside the building, the rain had stopped, but water still ran along the curb in narrow silver streams. I asked Michael why he had not shown her the agreement. He placed the blank legal pad inside his briefcase and said, because the document is evidence. Her answer is now evidence too. Lauren had entered that room, hoping to rewrite the past. Instead, under oath and in her own voice, she had locked herself inside a version of events that one sealed folder could prove was false. The hearing began 6 weeks after the deposition, in a courtroom that felt smaller than I remembered. Lauren sat beside Charles with 3 binders arranged in front of them, each one marked with colored tabs. Michael brought only the worn leather briefcase and a thin folder. The difference looked almost careless. That was what Lauren believed. Her financial expert testified first. He explained that Reed Industrial Automation had a fair market value of approximately $38 million. He described recurring contracts, manufacturing equipment, proprietary software, and projected growth. Then Charles asked what 1/2 of that value represented. The expert answered $19 million. The number moved through the room like a final decision. Charles argued that Lauren had supported me through 17 years of marriage and deserved either half the company or a cash payment large enough to replace it. He spoke about delayed vacations, business dinners, and the years I had worked late. He did not speak about the $1,800,000 in debt. He did not mention the nights I slept in my office or the employees who risked their own savings when the company nearly failed. Those facts did not fit the story he wanted the judge to believe. Lauren watched me while he spoke. Her expression remained calm, but I recognized the confidence behind it. She thought the value report had done the difficult work. She thought the only question left was how I would pay her. Charles offered what he called a reasonable compromise. Lauren would accept $15 million in cash and abandon her demand for voting shares. It sounded generous until you remembered she was offering to surrender something she had never owned. The judge turned toward Michael and asked whether we wished to respond. He stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. We would like to begin with the agreement executed 11 years ago. Charles rose immediately and said no such enforceable agreement had been produced before the deposition. Michael replied that it had been disclosed according to the court's schedule, authenticated, and provided to opposing counsel weeks earlier. Charles looked down at his binder. For the first time that morning, his movements lost their rhythm. Michael opened the leather briefcase. The brass latches made the same quiet sound I remembered from the first day of the hearing. He removed the sealed folder and handed the original document to the clerk. A copy went to the judge. Another went to Charles. Lauren leaned toward him and whispered something I could not hear. He did not answer. Michael called Elaine Porter, the attorney who had represented Lauren when the agreement was signed. Elaine was older now, with silver in her hair and reading glasses resting low on her nose. She testified that Lauren had hired her independently. She confirmed that Lauren had received a full explanation of the agreement, reviewed it for 5 days, requested 2 revisions, and signed it voluntarily in front of a notary. Michael asked whether the agreement addressed future company value. Elaine opened her copy and read the relevant language aloud. Lauren had waived all present and future ownership claims connected to Reed Industrial Automation, including appreciation, retained earnings, equity growth, and proceeds from a later sale. The room became so quiet that I could hear the judge turning each page. Michael then displayed the signature page. Lauren's name appeared at the bottom. Her initials appeared beside every paragraph dealing with ownership. Charles argued that she could not have predicted the company would become valuable. Elaine answered that uncertainty was the purpose of the agreement. Lauren had wanted protection if the company failed. In exchange, I received the benefit if it survived. Michael introduced the old loan records showing that I had accepted full responsibility for the debt. He produced bank correspondence confirming that Lauren's assets had been released from exposure. He showed that the agreement had been followed for 11 years without objection. Then he played a short section of Lauren's deposition. Her own voice filled the courtroom. I would never have agreed to that. Another answer followed. No lawyer explained any waiver to me. Michael stopped the recording. He did not raise his voice. Mrs. Reed, is that your testimony? Lauren looked at Charles. He whispered to her. Then she answered that she did not remember signing the agreement and had trusted the professionals around her. Michael placed the document on the witness table. Is that your signature? She stared at it. It appears to be. Are those your initials on each page? Another pause. They appear to be. He showed her the 2 revisions she had personally requested. One protected her retirement account. The other protected the house from company creditors. Both were written in language proposed by Elaine and approved by Lauren before signing. Michael asked whether anyone had forced her to request those protections. She said no. He asked whether she had received exactly what she wanted from the agreement. She did not answer immediately. The judge directed her to respond. Yes, she said quietly. That single word carried more weight than the valuation report, the binders, and every polished argument Charles had made. Michael returned to our table and closed the folder. Paper does not look powerful. It does not shine or speak for itself. It waits. It remembers. 11 years earlier, Lauren had insisted that the company's risk belong only to me. Now the same pages were reminding her that the reward had followed the risk exactly where she had placed it. The judge did not rule immediately. She called a recess and left the bench with the agreement, the loan records, and Lauren's deposition transcript stacked in front of her. For 40 minutes, no one in the courtroom spoke above a whisper. Charles studied his notes. Lauren stared at the empty bench as if waiting for the room to return to the version she had expected. Michael closed the leather briefcase and rested both hands on the table. I looked toward the 2 board members seated behind us. Their shoulders had relaxed, but neither of them smiled. This was not entertainment to them. A ruling against the company could have changed expansion plans, credit agreements, and the future of 126 employees. When the judge returned, everyone stood. She began by saying that divorce law required fairness, but fairness did not permit a person to accept protection from risk and later deny the agreement that provided it. She found that Lauren had signed voluntarily, received independent legal advice, requested specific revisions, and benefited from the arrangement for 11 years. The waiver was valid. Reed Industrial Automation, including its appreciation and retained value, remained my separate property. Lauren would receive no shares, no voting rights, no board seat, and no payment based on the company's $38 million valuation. The remaining marital assets would be divided under the ordinary rules of the court, but the company was removed from the calculation. The words were calm and technical. Their effect was not. Charles lowered his pen. Lauren's face did not collapse the way people imagine in stories. It became still. She asked him something under her breath, and he answered without looking at her. The judge also addressed the deposition. She said Lauren's statements were inconsistent with the documentary record and would affect how the court evaluated her credibility in the remaining financial issues. That was the part Lauren had created for herself. Michael had not trapped her. The document had not trapped her. She had been given a chance to tell the truth and had chosen a more convenient history. When the hearing ended, Lauren approached me near the courtroom doors. For the first time in months, there were no lawyers between us. She asked whether I had planned to humiliate her. I told her no. Humiliation had never been the point. She said I could have warned her that the agreement still existed. I reminded her that she had signed it, kept her house and retirement accounts protected because of it, and testified that it had never happened. She looked toward the floor and said the company had become part of our life. It became part of your life after it became valuable, I said. My voice stayed level. When it was only debt, you made sure it belonged to me. She did not answer. I left the courthouse with Michael and carried the old briefcase down the stone steps. The afternoon air was cold, and traffic moved along Washington Street as if nothing important had happened. That is the strange thing about endings. The world rarely pauses for them. The next morning, I arrived at the plant before 6. The production floor lights came on one row at a time. Machines warmed. Coffee brewed in the break room. Rosa found me beside an unfinished control cabinet and asked how the hearing had gone. I told her the company was safe. She closed her eyes for 1 second, then nodded and returned to her desk. By 8 o'clock, I gathered the employees in the main fabrication area. I did not discuss Lauren. I did not share courtroom details. I told them only that no ownership change would occur and that every current job, contract, and expansion plan would continue. Relief moved through the room in quiet breaths and exchanged glances. Then I announced something I had been considering since the day I found Lauren's email. I would transfer a portion of my personal shares into an employee benefit trust. The people who had helped keep the company alive would now participate more directly in the value they helped create. I also asked the board to establish a permanent employee representative seat. Rosa became the first person nominated. She tried to refuse, saying she was an office manager, not an executive. I reminded her that when the company had 12 days of cash left, she understood its value better than any executive in the state. The board approved her unanimously. Weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Lauren received a fair division of the home equity, savings, and other marital property. She did not leave with nothing in the literal sense. She left with nothing from the company she had tried to claim after rejecting every burden that built it. I did not celebrate that distinction. Revenge would have kept me tied to the same bitterness I was trying to leave behind. Instead, I returned to the work. On the first anniversary of the ruling, our apprenticeship program accepted 20 young technicians from across Indiana. Rosa presented the first scholarship to the daughter of an employee who had stayed during the bankruptcy year. As I watched the girl hold the certificate, I thought about the agreement in Michael's briefcase. For years, I believed it was only a shield against loss. I was wrong. It was a record of choice. Lauren had chosen safety when the future looked dark. The people standing on that factory floor had chosen faith, work, and shared responsibility. She wanted half the harvest, but when the storm came, she had signed a document saying the field belonged to me alone.